Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're not too tired from the Super Bowl yesterday. Pretty easy to get to bed early on that game. But really excited to have you here this evening and talk a little bit about Cherry Willow. The theme for today's episode and keeping up with Valentine's Day this week is unconditional love. As you may have seen, I have this really cool design that we put together, human eyes, not other eyes, with unconditional love as the featured highlight of the call to action. And that's really what we want Cherry Willow to stand for as a brand. And really excited to introduce to you all Danny, my director of development for Cherry Willow, and Shawna, director of impact. So super excited to bring them both on. And Danny, I'll kick it off with you. I'd love to just kind of give you an opportunity to share with the people a little bit about yourself, your background, and then your journey to joining us over here at Cherry Willow.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt. And yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So my name is Danny Fajardo. I recently joined Cherry Willow as the Director of Development. I have been working in the philanthropy space now for about 17 years, really working with underserved populations. It's a passion of mine. I foresee this being the future of my career as well, or the rest of my career. And so, I'm really thankful for this opportunity. I've worked in the healthcare space and in the housing and homeless space in the philanthropy sector. And I'm just really thrilled to be here with Cherry Willow. Really great initiative. And I'm just really excited to see it blossom. So thank you, Matt, for the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great, Danny. And Sean, I'd just love to give you the same opportunity just to introduce yourself and get a little bit of your background.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shawna Edwards, and same as Danny, I've been in the nonprofit philanthropy with the underserved population, really working with the foster care system, the youth, and transitioning to just adulthood and trying to navigate being an adult. And it's just really touched my heart, and I'm just ready to touch everybody else's heart. And it's just so fun and so exciting. And I'm just excited to be here and ready to rock this boat with everybody.
Yeah, that was awesome. And it's been incredible getting to work alongside both of you, and really appreciate the nonprofit experience and the passion that you both bring, especially when, we're talking about homelessness and a vulnerable population. It's that passion and the mission is really important. And you guys are both just exemplary of that and just living by those values of supporting each other. And that kind of brings us to the theme of today's show, with like the true meaning of unconditional love. And don't forget to, tag Cherry Willow Apparel in the comments, because we are giving away up to a $50 item from the website, just for participating in the show, helping support us and grow the brand. And that's really, one of the things when I created Cherry Willow that I felt that people that are experiencing homelessness need, is just to show up with unconditional love and support them, meet them where they're at. And I think that when you look at how a lot of people in society perceive people that are homeless, you traditionally have, again, someone that looks kind of similar like this on the street that's maybe asking for food or asking for money. But there's also a large population of people that, have jobs, that have stable incomes, and just aren't able to afford housing. And so we're trying to raise awareness while also advocating for affordable housing, and just building a community to do that. So Danny, I'd love to just have you dive in a little bit on your specific background in, LA with, housing, and, again, one of the things why Cherry Willow, our approach is a little bit different, and what has you excited to be here?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm super thrilled to be here to support the work of Cherry Willow and what we're looking to do. I've actually always worked in the nonprofit space, in direct services, or, really on the front line as an organization, addressing homelessness. And from the philanthropy perspective, we're always looking at innovative ways to raise funds. And so, with Cherry Willow and the apparel line and, proceeds of those sales going towards different prevention and homeless initiatives, it's just a really really cool angle. And it's really an honor to be part of that work. And so, we've heard of a lot of other brands out there like Tom's and Bombas and such. And I never thought I would join a company where we were actually, selling apparel and proceeds going back towards prevention efforts and homeless initiatives. And so, for me, one of the things that working in homeless services that you realize is, clothing is one of the most sought after items. And so it makes sense. And it's just a real privilege to be part of this work. So thank you, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, again, like Shawna, I'd love for you to just kind of dive into, obviously your experience comes in the foster care and just showing up empathetically for those kids. So a little bit about like what unconditional love for you means, and and how we represent that as Cherry Willow, as the brand, and what that means for us, going forward and building a community of people that are just advocating for the people that are experiencing homelessness. And then obviously kids are a big part of that circle.
Yeah, specifically for youth and then transitioning to young adults, it becomes a cycle. And the number one thing dealing with unconditional love is support and consistency and showing up and just being there daily, or even if it's not daily, weekly, just checking in and making sure that they're there, and just true connection and just being that support, making sure they're okay. And that's where unconditional love comes in, is just being that rock and just being consistent. And that's where a lot of homelessness youth transition we lack, is just the empathy and the connection, and then just the support. And that's unconditional love, is support, and we need that. And I'm just ready to build the community because we have support. We just need to do it, support each other. And I'm excited to be part of Cherry Willow and start the support system.
Yeah, and I love how you focused on connection, right? And that's one of the main reasons why when I came up with this concept, I utilized apparel, because how you show up in the world is a large part of your identity. And when you're out, in public, or you're at the grocery store, you're really creating that opportunity for connection. Because like you said, even as the brand grows and we get more people that are advocating for affordable housing for all, and advocating just for showing up to meet people where they're at, it's a large opportunity for someone that maybe is currently homeless, that you see in the grocery store, or that's at the coffee shop, and they see someone wearing Cherry Willow apparel, and now that creates an opportunity for a real life connection. And you can have such a positive impact just by going up and spending a little bit of time and just learning about these people, because they have wonderful stories, and they're great people, and they deserve our unconditional love. And that's really obviously the theme of today's episode. But just really what I think more people could do is to just show up and have those daily positive actions. And that's, the problem is so large that it can feel really difficult to tackle. But I feel like if more people just focused on the singular action that they can make in their community, and that connection that they can bridge with that individual, if we got 330 million people in this country, if more of us went out every day and just took that 15 minutes to give someone a meal, or just even listen to their story, I really feel like we could make a difference. And so that's what Cherry Willow, that's what we're trying to do, is just to create a community of advocates and people that are showing up in the world and putting a positive foot forward. So really excited to be here with both of you tonight talking about that. And then having it be winter, obviously Danny and Shawna, you guys are both in pretty warm areas, but in Chicago, there's always a need for people. And even when I was thinking of like New Orleans, they had that huge storm with like 6 inches of snow. And I was down there over the New Year's and, met with quite a few people, and they could use the clothes and they could use the care. So I'd love for you guys to talk about, like how apparel is important, and maybe just enlighten some people out there that aren't familiar with, people that are homeless and their needs for just, something that we would maybe consider a simple item for us, but the importance of, providing that for people. Danny, I'd love to give you a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think there's just working in the homeless space for a few years, and I'm based out of Los Angeles. So, of course we have warmer weather, but as you all know, we've all been going through a little bit of this, climate crisis with the fires, and, rainstorms coming this week. And I think one of the misconceptions is that people that are homeless are people that they're lazy or that they don't want to work. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. Many people are working, multiple jobs just to, afford the homes that they live in. Housing affordability across the United States has been, a top factor of homelessness. And when you couple it with mental health and some of the other challenges people experience, but, you know, clothing and, having access to apparel is just, it seems like one of those basic needs that everybody should have access to. And so for me, it's really humbling to be part of this work. It's been humbling to be part of the nonprofit space these last 17 years. And for me, I feel like um, having access to just clean clothes, you know we take it for granted sometimes, right? And I always remember this instance where it was around the holidays, and we were serving families at the agency I worked for, and there were families there with their kids, and they were living in a motel, an interim housing site, and the kids themselves were so thankful to get shoes and sweaters and clothing. And we made an effort as well to make sure the clothing was varied, different types of clothing, different types of shoes, because when everyone has the same backpack, then as a kid going to school and you're already living in, you're unstable with your housing, the last thing you want to be asked is why do you all have the same clothes or the same shoes or the same backpack, right? And so I think we forget about just how privileged we are to have a closet of clothes. And so with Cherry Willow and the work that Cherry Willow is doing to bring apparel, with the mission behind it, it's really, really exciting, I think, to be able to provide that and to provide those resources to much needed organizations across the the United States that many people experiencing homeless, and largely because of the housing affordability. And so for me, it's a real honor to be part of this work.
Yeah, that's it's just really cool to see people that are passionate and just about making a difference. And I know Shawna, obviously with the kids in foster care, I'm sure there was a lack of available clothing or things of that nature, but would love for you to be able to share a little bit about your experiences and just help people understand the situations that those kids are facing every day.
Yeah, hundreds of children coming through our program, and just the transitions from moving from house to house. You don't even know if you're going to have clothes, or when you're moving from whatever placement you're at, you don't know if you get to bring those clothes with you. And then when they move from one placement to another, they're expected to start school right away. And then they start school right away and they don't even have clothing. And then it takes months or weeks to go through this process with the state of getting this clothing. So like Danny said, they're expected to do these normacy things that other children do or young adults do, specifically teenagers. And that is very, very, very difficult to be a teenager. Imagine 16, 17 years old, and you don't even you have the clothes that you walked into your new placement, the only clothes that you have on your back. And then they're trying to figure out what clothing for you to go to the next day to school on. And it's almost embarrassing. It's very difficult. It's very traumatizing. It's hurtful. So just the impactfulness of handing out clean and nice clothing, and clothing that means something, clothing that has an intent behind it, it really will move mountains for people. And I'm just so excited to do it. So yeah, I think I'm ready.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't really understand, or if you see like when some municipalities, they'll talk about these sweeps and just clearing tents or clearing encampments, and that's those people's homes, like that's their possessions. And even in the shelter environment, there's generally a small space, so you have to really prioritize, what possessions you do have. And so like you think about, as many people and what they hold on to, and you have all of this space when you're in a home that you can keep these possessions. And that's not something that is an opportunity for kids in foster care or people that are even in shelters or on the street. That's something that's really part of their identity, because it's one of the few things that they can bring and show up in the world as. And so that's why creating a brand that they can be proud of and to represent, and know that people are out there advocating for them when they wear the brand. That's, for me, that is really exciting, and love to continue that work. And then I believe we said a comment or a question come through about like how I came up with Cherry Willow from Eli. So the name, what I wanted to do with the brand was to focus on nature, and how in order for the cherry blossoms to bloom, it has to shed its leaves in the fall and in the winter. And so as people, we're not always in bloom, right? And we're always in these different cycles of growth and these stages. And so the people that are currently experiencing homelessness, they really need our love and support so that they can empower themselves to get better their situations. And so it's just similar to like in nature. If we want to help them bloom again, and get out of homelessness, then we really need to invest in them right now and care for them where they're at. And so that's how I came up with the symbolism behind Cherry Willow. But actually, the name itself was from the two streets that I grew up on. So I grew up on Cherry Drive and Willow Drive. And so that's where I first started doing my service work. My mother was very passionate about supporting largely migrant workers in our community. There wasn't a tremendous amount of homelessness in the area where I grew up. And so that's how I came up with the name of Cherry Willow, and the brand to just really represent, the unconditional love that I learned from my mother, and how she showed up for other people in the world. And so that's what I wanted the brand to stand for. And then I think really the next kind of topic that we were going to dive into was the link between stable housing and dignity. So with Cherry Willow, obviously establishing the apparel brand and building that community is the first step. But really, housing is the ultimate vision, and creating these community-based housing centers. After we're able to address some of the misconceptions for the people that are like the not in my backyard community, where they really don't understand, what these people are experiencing and why it's actually beneficial to communities to have these housing entities that get people off the street, because it enables, people to take care of themselves. So like I think of, myself and the people that I've loved that have experienced mental health challenges and things of that nature. Even when they're having a stable job and they have a family and support system, it can be extremely challenging to make progress. And so when you throw in a really unstable environment, and ask people to battle these things, and a lot of people turn to substances because of being on the street. It's not the other way around most of the time. From the people that I've talked to in the shelter, it's very difficult to really continue to show up as positive as so many of these people do, when they don't have, a strong foundation. And so that's really, why we're ultimately working towards, the creation of more affordable housing. But Danny, I'd love for you to share a little bit about, like the work that you've done with LA Family Housing, and just how providing housing for people is really a great way to help them, feel stable enough to start really doing a lot of that work and empowering themselves to stay healthy in these situations.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you make a really good point when we talk about dignity and, homelessness, and that I think we all want, I'm pretty sure everybody wants to live with, dignity. And we forget that on the other side, of, the issue of homelessness, the tents that we see on the street, the NIMBYism, all of the negative, stigma and stereotypes around why somebody becomes homeless, without really understanding, how somebody got there, and I think that's one of the the biggest challenges around homelessness. And what I see, for example, and when I talk to people in this space, there's a huge fatigue, especially, here in Los Angeles, where California in general, where housing affordability is, through the roof. And you have, people working multiple jobs just to maintain their housing, or making the decision, do I buy food, or do I pay the utilities or pay my rent? Or, we forget that these are people just like you and I, that, many people are a paycheck away from becoming homeless. And, for me, you know, dignity and, having, warm clothing, having access to health care, your home is really your number one social determinant of your health. And without a home, you really don't have, when you're in survival mode, you're not thinking about, um, what's next. You're really just thinking about, how do I survive? How do I, stay fed? Or how do I, so for me, like, having a house is the foundation for everything else. And when you have that, it really does create stability for you, right? And so there's that. And then there's, also access to healthcare. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, Matt, that I thought, well, reminded me, one of the most interesting stories that I heard from somebody that, was experiencing homelessness. And, people always say, well, why don't you come inside? Why don't you just, there's too many rules. That's why they don't want to come in, or they really like, their substances or their drugs. They don't want to get off the drugs. And, it's a little bit more complex than that. One story that I heard that was really impactful for me, and I always remember, was, what came first, right? Some people think, oh, well, somebody's on substances, that they don't want to get help. But, the story I heard was from a female, and who was addicted to drugs. And, for her, one of the motivations, or why she did the drugs, was at night, she wanted to stay awake. And so staying awake was a reason, because then it would prevent her from, from any kind of rape or domestic violence that women do experience when homeless. And I thought that was a really interesting point. Just why somebody is motivated to do substances when they're living on the street, or looking, developing a community, for example, how they build community. And, like, one of the other things that I found very interesting was, people coming inside safely. To us, it might just look like junk, or, why don't they just throw whatever possessions they have away? Well, this is all they have, right? These are their communities, and these are people just like you and I, and they need human connection. And this is the human connection they build within their communities. And so it's just something really to keep in mind when we think about homelessness. If you've never volunteered at a homeless shelter, or, an interim housing site, or bridge housing as it's also known, I would encourage you to do it, and really get to know the people that are there. And you'll learn their stories, why they ended up where they ended up. And you'll learn that they have the same motivations, a lot of them, that you and I have. They want a warm home, a warm bed to go to. They want to, have access to good paying job. They want, health insurance so that they can take care of their conditions. They want, services, and, a better life for their kids if they have families. And so, I think, really just put yourself in their shoes sometimes, and try to understand beyond the misconceptions that exist out there.
Yeah, that was really well said, Danny. And yeah, just absolutely encourage, like, anyone to get involved and just volunteer. Because I think, when I think back to my first experience in serving, people that were homeless, it came when I was at Loyola. And we just went out and distributed essentially sack lunches. So, something similar that you would pack for your kids, but just like a sandwich, an apple, things like that. And I had never really spoken to very many people that were homeless. Like I said, it wasn't a huge population of people in the community where I was growing up. And so then in moving to, a big city in Chicago and going to Loyola, it was really an eye-opening experience where, I feel like in order to kind of walk past these people, we almost as a society have to otherize them, because it's very difficult to stop and take care of every person that you see that's struggling. But that doesn't mean that you can't go and take that time, you know, take that extra 10-15 minutes and make that a habit. You have the time. And right now you're probably spending it on social media or, watching a show, but like it takes only an hour and a half, 2 hours a week to just get involved with a nonprofit in your community. Go out at a shelter and serve. They're always looking for volunteers. And there's a lot of other ways that you can help. If you're a business owner, you can provide, like maybe some job training, or, there's maybe some stuff that needs to be done at the shelter that you could donate, your time towards. So there's many different actions that we can take that can improve, the situation for everyone. And then Danny, something that you brought up was like, it's a really hard lifestyle when you're living homeless in the shelter. Even when I was at the shelter yesterday, we've lost 5 people in the past 3 months. And if you look at the statistics, according to the National Institutes of Health, people that are homeless live about 18 years shorter lives than people that have a home. So it's, having that home is really important, and it's life extending in a lot of ways. And it's just really a tragedy that there's so many people that are having to live on the streets. And even when looking more at like the foster care system, like there's just so many kids and that are just struggling, and they deserve an opportunity just like everyone else. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything specifically, Shawna, from your experience in foster care that you'd like to share, but it's just really need more people volunteering and caring about it and just doing what you can to be involved.
Yeah, it's just the time. Time is, I think, comes first before anything. The advocacy is what we're really trying to do with the apparel, and time. Homelessness specifically, sometimes when you go to help someone, I've tried several times, and there's specifically one woman in my community, but sometimes when you go to help someone, they almost won't take what you want to give them. But if you go and just sit with them in silence, they'll take that first, because they just want the support. They just want someone to sit with them. And same thing in the foster care. There's so many children that just need someone to talk to. There's so many children that if you just go pick them up and walk around the neighborhood, go pick them up, take them to the park, go pick them up, walk around the mall. There's so many people that just need the time, the support, the conversation, and then that will open up the door for the connection, and then the relationship, and then the healing, and then the job training, and the medical, and then the trauma healing, and then so on and so forth. But definitely the time is where, and the advocacy, and then just the community engagement, but the time, the support.
Yeah, and I think that's why it comes back to just like focusing on education. Because if you're not really aware what the issue is actually stemming from, then it enables you to kind of just not address it. And so when you actually go in and you learn about these people and you learn their stories of, like, it's not the stories that you're thinking most of the time. These are people that have jobs. These are people that have families. And it's just really difficult in our society to be able to earn enough to have a place to live. And if you look at just even housing in general, it's the way less people are being able to afford a home. And I think if you look at the statistics, it's something like over 50% of people in the United States are having to spend more than 33% of their income on housing. And so that's just really not sustainable. Credit card debt is at all-time highs. There's so many factors that come around with like policy change. And that's why building a community of educated advocates for, not only the people that are experiencing homelessness, who are the most visible sign, of the housing crisis that we see, but also it benefits, everyone in our society. If we can prioritize and focus more on, caring for each other, and providing that environment for people to grow and thrive, then they're going to become, more productive citizens, in the country, and they're going to go on to do, great things. And it's just, to Danny's point earlier, when you're in survival mode, it's really difficult to build. And that stress is what has people turn, to substances. And it's just something that is really difficult to navigate, and stress can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And just think about how stressful you would feel if you're on the street every night and you're, what would you do? Like, how would that feel? I would be scared, even if, I know where I'm at, and it's like, I can handle myself, like I train and but you're on the street, anything can happen. And so that's why it's really about, like education and turning love into action, and taking those small daily actions, investing your time, and just being curious about the people, because they're people, they're in your community, and they deserve your love and compassion and support. And that's the work that we're doing at Cherry Willow. So I'll talk a little bit now about, like the apparel brand and launching it. That's where we're at right now. But we're also working on a technology initiative to help provide care and be like a single resource for people that are experiencing homelessness. Because, when you have limited possessions, you have limited storage, even keeping track of things like documentation, birth certificates, IDs, if that gets caught up in a sweep, now there's another challenge before they could, even if they were employable and seeking employment, if you don't have an ID, there's not a lot that you can do. And so we're working to provide an easy resource where people that are experiencing homelessness can get access to all of the wonderful nonprofits that exist to serve them out there, access to job training. So for business owners, if you wanted to lend some support, you can definitely engage with us on, what that would look like and how we can incorporate, some of the skill training that people who are trying to better themselves and create those opportunities for each other. And then ultimately, moving into the creation of affordable housing, because really there's no end to homelessness without, housing. And so just getting people into those homes, but more importantly, having the support systems, because just a home alone is not going to always be an environment that people are comfortable in. So having that community, knowing that there are people that care about them, that are there to support them, and meet them where they're at, and understanding that, safe use for addiction, like that is a treatment that helps people. People that are alcoholics and they need to wean off of that, it's not just about cold turkey. And that's a lot of the halfway houses or the transitional houses. It can be really challenging for people to be sober for 30 days before being able to go into that. And so that's why building community, there's a lot of AA groups and NA groups that, volunteer at the shelter that I'm at. And they always, are advocating and willing to sponsor people. And they're some of the most positive people that you'll ever meet. And they've gone through some of the most difficult challenges. And that's always something that impresses me with the people that I meet in the shelter. It's just how positive they are. They don't have a tremendous amount of material possessions, but what they do have is each other. And I think that they lean on each other. And so if we can have more people that just understand the value in coming together, and we can really build a community using apparel to do that, that's really exciting. And that's where we're at. Yes, I would say it is a national movement. Danny is in LA, Shawna is in Florida, and I'm in Chicago. So, you triangulate us, we got the whole nation covered.
I think there was
Danny or Shawna, any other remarks?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there was another question I saw about, will Cherry Willow be doing any donations, or, how does the proceeds from sales go towards the work that we're doing, the homeless initiatives?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So in the shelter that I've looked at, trying to meet the needs. So anything goes to investing towards the technology that helps empower people that are homeless. But I think kind of meeting the needs of the nonprofits and the shelters. Like, for example, AID is another outreach organization that is in my area. And so they have different events. And so I would just ask them, like, they accept donations. And for whatever reason, they have a really difficult time with belts. And, I wouldn't think of that, right? As I didn't, oh, wow, but it was a huge deal. So I went down and, I got like a couple dozen belts and brought them over. And so like small gestures, but like really filling gaps where, the homeless shelter that I serve at, what do they need, and how can Cherry Willow, use the funds that we're raising to kind of meet those gaps. And whether that's, focusing on prevention, or if they are in need of clothing and we can have a clothing drive. So really that's where we're at right now, is just using the funds to meet some of the gaps that are in the existing coverage areas, while we're really working on, developing the technology to, give people that are homeless an opportunity to learn and to earn. So that's something that, we're building out as an initiative where people can go in and they can actually have remote work opportunities, so they can start earning from the shelter. And then there's some financial education components as well, where not only are you earning, but we can also help you get connected with, service providers, so that you can start to learn how to budget, and you can start to learn how to save, and you can build a path, towards housing. And so that's some of the empowerment work that we're doing. And that's really what the proceeds are going towards. And then ultimately, once the technology initiative is really off the ground and people are using it and they're benefiting from it and they're improving their situations, then we can help them get into housing now that they have these learning and earning opportunities, and they're able to, really better their situations. So that's a great question, though. Yeah, and then just really appreciate all of the interactions in the comments. So we have, I believe, at least 3 folks that we're going to do the prize drawing. But yeah, Danny or Shawna, if there was any other comments that you two had, but just really, really excited about where we're at, and thank you both so much for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I would just add that, one of the things, people ask all the time, how could I get involved with this work? How could I, obviously there's the apparel sales and, supporting Cherry Willow in that sense, so that proceeds can go back into the work. But, individuals, like you said, businesses, they can all support, different homeless initiatives. They can support their local, interim housing or bridge housing sites or shelters. You can donate meals, you can donate food, but I think it's really the opportunity here is the awareness. So, follow us at Cherry Willow Apparel on social media. If you can't make monetary contributions, maybe, go through your closet and, we all have a to-do list of like, I got to get this over, donate these clothes. I'll get to it. But when you get to it and you actually donate them, there's also, there is a tax incentive from that too, from donating, clothing items, etc. So really find a way that works for you. There's not one just way. You can volunteer as well. If you're not donating items, you can volunteer. If you're not volunteering, you could, do a peer-to-peer fundraiser for an organization, maybe in your community. And, in lieu of gifts for your birthday, you could, set up a fundraiser that could benefit a local, organization serving the homeless. There's just a number of ways that you can get involved and get creative. And I would encourage you to, reach out to your local, you can reach out to us, you can reach out to your local nonprofits in your community and look for ways to get involved. 9 times out of 10, most charities or nonprofits in this space are going to hear from you. And, one of the things that, as I worked with donors and worked with different, volunteer groups, one of the things that we forget to ask is, them is, what would you like to see, right? We're doing, as an organization, we're doing all these initiatives to support the unhoused, but there's a lot of other ways to get involved. And if we just ask the questions like, what would you like to see that's not being done? 9 times out of 10, the organizations will hear you and they will open an opportunity for you to get involved with their group. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. And then the other part of it that I heard you talk about, Matt, was about the staff that work at organizations as well. One of the really great things about the Housing First model, and really meeting clients or individuals that need services where they're at, is sobriety is usually not a factor a lot of times, and that's a great thing. And that really brings people inside and allows them to take advantage of the continuum of services, the wraparound services, the case management, the social work services that are available, so that somebody can get stabilized and eventually move into their next level of housing, permanent supportive housing, or permanent affordable housing. And so yeah, it's so varied. And not everybody that is out there on the streets is there because of addiction. They may have had an unresolved trauma or an unresolved mental health issue that had never been resolved, which resulted in them ending up on the streets. Or maybe it was an LGBTQ youth that was kicked out of their home because of their lifestyle, and they found community in where they live. They're homeless, but they found community there, and through that they got caught up in some other things, and one thing led to another. But it's not always so simple to say, oh, everyone on the streets is addicted to heroin or addicted to drugs, and that's why they're there. It could stem from something as small as unresolved mental health and trauma, which ultimately resulted in their homelessness. So
Yeah, really well said again, Danny. And just another thing that you can do is contact your local congressperson. Let them know that you support HUD and affordable housing initiatives, especially with this administration. There's already been some threats to nonprofit funding, and without the federal funding, it's really restrictive in terms of having these wonderful organizations do the really impactful work. So not only can you help support our mission and be a visible sign of hope and advocacy in your community, by wearing Cherry Willow apparel, but make sure you extend that advocacy to your representatives. And there's the hotline that you can call and get in touch with your local community, and just let them know that the HUD and these resources that are existing federally, are extremely important to you, and you do not want to see those stripped away. Because not only do we need the support from the nonprofits and our communities, but also the existing federal programs, they need to stay funded. If they don't continue to fund those initiatives, the situation is only going to get worse. So that's another way that you can advocate, is just to call your local representative, email your senator, email your House of Representatives, and just let them know that you feel passionately about supporting affordable housing, and that it's extremely important for you and for your community. And then Shawna, I don't know if you had any closing thoughts before we kind of did the raffle.
Yes, just my closing sentence is I just want to challenge you for your time. And when you do your time at your local nonprofit, thank the person that's there, because it's always a thankless job. We never get thanked for what we do, but thank you. Thank you so much for donating your time. And thank you. I'm excited for all of us to just be together and do it together. And I'm just ready. I'm ready to just end it. I'm ready to end homelessness together.
There we go. Yeah, and it's going to require a lot of people, and we're all got to be pulling in the same direction. So that's extremely exciting, though. And I think just showing up tonight, that's a great way to just educate yourself on the situation, and that's more than a lot of people do. And if we can get more people educated, then we can make more of an impact.
For sure.
Cool. So here are the little prize. We got a little wheel action, which is always fun.
Yay!
Congratulations. Katie, thank you for the support. Thank you for the comments. And then, yeah, just reach out. You can reach out to me directly, matt@cherrywillowapparel.com. And I will, looks like we have your LinkedIn info there. So I will also reach out to you directly via LinkedIn. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This was a really good episode. I feel like we got to a lot of important topics discussed. And yeah, stay tuned to all of our social channels. And please just like and share if you can't donate or support us, via buying apparel. Just like and share our pages so we can spread this mission for more people out there. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.